redemption. It has been an excellent journey so far, and we thank you for being a participant, both for the presenters as well as for the viewers and the presenters. Today we had a little bit of technical difficulties. I guess it always has to be something, but we were able to get through. So for many of you who are accustomed to joining via the landing page, streaming through YouTube, we will have the rebroadcast uploaded to that later for the replay. But for now, thank you for joining us through Zoom. So this 30-day redemption journey has been 10 days of mind, 10 days of body, and 10 days of spirit. And we've had some fantastic presenters. And so for the final presentation, we wanted to touch on the topic, a spirit topic of dealing with the deceased and dealing with the ancestral rites. And so we have with us the Ancestral Burial Society, and Director Z of the Ancestral Burial Society is going to take us through what that process is like from an ancestral perspective and dealing with the life, the ancestral debt, and the natural burial process. So we're going to get into that, but let me give you a little information and some background. So Director Z oversees the Ancestral Burial Society, which is an environmentally focused, community-owned and operated organization. And so the Ancestral Burial Society provides a range of natural funeral and burial services, products, resources, and options, which are in harmony with nature and do not pollute the environment. So that's very important. So if you've ever heard of green burial or ancestral burial, this is what we'll be talking about today in details. Okay, and so they facilitate natural funerals and burials with honor and do not desecrate the body or memorial of the deceased. They also educate the public about environmental destruction caused by mainstream funeral homes and the cemetery industry, and they teach the history of green burial and its beneficial effects on the ecosystem. So great information, much needed. And so a little bit of background on Director Z. He began his work in ancestral burial, natural burial, and green burial for over 15 years. Hard work and dedication, as well as the strong support of a loyal team of families, has transformed him into a global expert, educator, manager, consultant, and advocate in the field of ancestral burial, natural burial, green burial, home funerals, home burials, home cemeteries, family cemeteries, traditional burial systems, ancestorship, civil government funerals, civil government funerals, burials, and cemetery law. So you can learn a lot. And of course, this 1 hour we're going to touch on the subject, but of course you know that this is a very extensive subject. We invite you to look further into that. Director Z also achieves extensive expertise in natural studies, natural law, tribal law, indigenous mateship and marriage, human family systems, animal family systems, selective mating, health and wellness, physical fitness, self-defense, etc. He concurrently serves as the dual director of the MAFA Society and the Society of Marriage and Families. His guiding influences are his loving parents, his wife, his children, his ancestors, the precognitive imperative to transform into the noble and supreme being that we are destined to become, and lastly, his immovable commitment to guide people along the journey. I know this personally because this has been a friend of mine for over 30 years. So what he's going to cover today is life, the ancestral debt, and natural burial. Number one, existence, its origins, and evolutionary pressures. Number two, the ancestral debt, the deleterious factors and restoration of the intergenerational contract. And number three, natural burial and its family implementation. So I'd like to bring to the screen, and he's going to cue up his presentation, my friend Director Z of the Ancestral Burial Society. Can we go ahead and get your mic queued up? And if you can, guess we may have to unmute. I'm not sure if you're unmuted, but go ahead and get your screen queued up and share with us this presentation today.
Greetings, Kashab. Can you hear me?
Hear you loud and clear.
Okay, wonderful. Well, greetings, and greetings to you, and greetings to the participants, all of the onlookers, visitors, friends, and everyone. Thank you. Can everyone see the presentation?
Yes, if you want to hit the little present button at the top, it will give you a chance to let um, the full screen take over, and then hit your arrows to the right to. So just hit the little present at the top next to share, all the way over to the right.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, you click that. No, not the share.
Sure.
Hit the present. Cancel that. There you go. Hit present.
Thank you.
There
Appreciate
you go.
that.
Right.
All right. So I take it just a second check. Everyone is able to see the screen clear.
Yes, sir.
All right. Wonderful. Well, thank you again, Kashab, for the opportunity. When I first heard about this project, awesome project that you were putting together. Very humble that you reached out and gave an opportunity for us, the Ancestral Burial Society, to actually share some of the things that we are doing and have been doing for quite a while with the public. Nonetheless, Ancestral Burial Society, let's get right to it. Okay, let me back up. So nonetheless, this presentation is going to cover three major areas. We'll do that to the best of our ability: life, the ancestral debt, and the natural burial. These are all connected. First thing I want to offer and mention that we can think about is in our DNA, and this is a quote from a gentleman named Lewis Thomas. It says in this quote, obviously, that we carry DNA from our ancestors, from that combination and fusion of different ancestors. And those cells, or the DNA, it has all sorts of instructions that's programmed into it. Everything from the way we look to the way we act to various sorts of traits that we carry, etc., etc., etc. So I thought this was a very fitting quote to use, and I'll read it. We carry stores of DNA in our nuclei that have come in at one time or another from the fusion of ancestral cells and the linking of ancestral organisms in symbiosis. Our genomes are catalogs of instructions from all kinds of sources in nature, filed for all kinds of contingencies. So that's something to think about as we go into this presentation. Again, that's by a gentleman named Lewis Thomas. Now, going into this presentation about life, we must remember one thing: it's competition. So if we're attempting, or if we wish, or if we seek to progress in life, we must accept and get actually very well rehearsed and practice on competing. Now, competition is not a bad thing. As we get into this presentation, we'll see, because in nature and many traditional cultures, males normatively, constantly are required to compete to mate or marry. And that's what mateship or marriage is. It's for the purpose of reproducing the family system, whatever that family system is. The family system, that's part of the ancestral technology that we just talked about, or in that quote, that's transferred in your genetics. And just a few examples I wanted to present about what can be considered, or what should be considered, ancestral technology: type of mating system, diet, child rearing, etc. Now, I'm not going to play this video, but I just gave the title of it that you can find on YouTube: Male Bison Fight for Harem Rights, BBC Earth. Nonetheless, I'm using this as an example. When you click that video on, when you have time to do it and watch it, you'll see that it's normal that among many different animal family groups, some sort of competition is being done for mating among many animal family groups. And in this case, the bison, they were butting each other, head-butting each other, et cetera, not to hurt or harm each other, but they were trying to determine in their own way who is most fit to mate, to ensure that whoever mates is the strongest, the fittest, whatever way they would describe it as. So nonetheless, mating rights, they're typically achieved or won through discipline, a formula of discipline, fitness, competition, strategy, et cetera, et cetera. That's something to think about as we go into this workshop. Nothing that is worth anything is just handed to us. You have to earn it. So life is already programmed for us to compete in order to secure your existence. And we present that as that's a form of intelligent design. It's like an algorithm. So just the same way we see these bison or any other creatures that compete to mate, that's already programmed because they do it over and over and over again. They didn't go to school, quote unquote, a school building like human beings do, but it's already a part of their nature. Again, when we apply ourselves to the maximum level, that secures whatever we are, our existence, but moreover, that ensures the perpetuation of our families and our family system. Another example now, going into this theme of competition, that is completely a part of life, is think about this. We already talked about the bison, right, just now. So before life even takes place, there's got to be a competition to see who's even eligible to be able to mate. So that's the first competition. So you have to compete to see who's even eligible to mate. Now we're talking about when, you know, people or animals, those that are selected for mating. Now, when copulation takes place, understand that there's also a competition. It's estimated that millions of sperm are racing to fertilize an egg. Racing, I might add. So we need to think about that in terms of one sperm just doesn't walk up and just fertilize an egg. It's a competition. They're all racing. Who knows what's going on inside, you know, inside that race. But nonetheless, only typically, let me say it right, because there's twins and also there's occasionally multiple births. But nonetheless, typically, the sperm that wins gets to fertilize the egg, and the loser, whoever loses, die. Think about that. That's a natural part of competition. Something or someone is going to win, and there's going to be a loser. And in this case, this competition for life with sperm, the losers die. So again, want to emphasize this point. Fertilization rights, the rights or the ability to fertilize, that's won through discipline, fitness, competition, strategy, et cetera, et cetera. And then whatever sperm reach the egg and fertilize the egg, you know, they merge the accumulated technologies that are coming from the egg and the, you know, the female's ancestors and the sperm's ancestors. Those technologies merge, and they create a new body that's now going to house that the expanded technologies coming from the egg and the sperm. And I want to emphasize, again, for those that can see the PowerPoint, this is just an estimate that between 200 to 300 million sperm are competing and racing to fertilize an egg. So think about that. 200 to 300 million means you cannot afford, any sperm that's racing cannot afford to have a bad day. Can't afford to wake up late. Can't afford to wait till something's handed to them. So that's just something to reflect on. Nonetheless, so again, emphasizing several points again, for life to even be possible, Competition is a part of it. You have to compete to even exist, to even get the chance to be born, to get the chance to mate. And that competition creates pressure. Pressure. Pressure creates growth and development, and that growth and development helps to continue the family strategy, whatever the family evolutionary strategy is. Again, emphasizing the 4 principles I mentioned earlier. That strategy is secured through discipline, fitness, competition, and superior strategy. Life is not a recreational activity. It's a mission that has an expiration date, what quote unquote people commonly refer to as death, which is not really death, it's transformation, but nonetheless. So we need to be mindful of that we're not here on a vacation. In order to become successful, you must treat it as such. When I say successful, whatever we're here to do, whatever we're here to do. Now, I want to emphasize another quote, add or submit another quote. This is by a gentleman named Edmund Burke. It says, quote, "It is ordained in the internal constitution of things that men of intemperate minds cannot be free. Their passions forge their fetters." Now, this is obviously saying that something that holds people back from full actualization, fully reaching their potential is intemperance. So let's define intemperance. Lack of self-control, or immoderate or excessive, inordinate, unreasonable, etc., etc. Basically, intemperate is a description of anything that causes a person to lose focus, to lose track on their purpose. So that's something to think about now as we go into these next slides. Another slide or another quote we'll submit by Gilbert K. Chesterton. And this is interesting now. So we're moving now from life. We just talked about the life portion. Now we're going into the ancestral debt. So again, the last slide that I mentioned, and I'll back it up just to emphasize it before we go into the ancestral debt. Oftentimes, the reason why people do not achieve the purpose, the goal, the reason they were born, is they are bound by things that cause them to lose discipline, to lose focus. Either they have excessive things that are taking their attention and their time and bringing them off track, etc., etc. So now we'll move back again into the ancestral debt. What does the ancestral debt mean? I'll read this quote by Gilbert K. Chesterton to give an example or give an idea. Quote, "Tradition means giving votes to the most obscure of all classes, your ancestors. It is the democracy of the dead. Tradition refuses to submit to that arrogant oligarchy who merely happen to be walking around." So a summary of this would be, tradition means your ancestors get a say in everything that you and the family are doing right now. It's saying that would be incorrect for people to just be doing everything on their own, in their own mind, because they feel they're alive, so who cares what their ancestors think, or that was back in the past or back in the days. This is defined a very interesting definition of tradition as tradition is making sure your ancestors, whatever that ancestral technology is, whatever the ancestral systems are, it continues in some way. It's not just cast to the side. So that's part of the ancestral debt. Continuing certain things that are beneficial, I might emphasize, beneficial, useful, helpful, evolutionary, growth and development, etc. That's part of the ancestral debt. I'll continue. Now, it's important to emphasize now, our ancestors have already earned the right forever and a lawful vote in the family affairs. Two examples, the reasons are they procreated us. We wouldn't be alive today without our ancestors. The DNA that you have, that body that you're sitting in, standing in, whatever you're doing in, living in, it was given to you. So it's not as if a person could say, look, I made myself. No, you didn't. So there's already a debt there. And the technology that we have that oftentimes we like to think of as of our own intelligence, we're so smart, we made everything up, we're just this hyper creative person out of the blue. No. As genetic studies continue to show, many of the traits and the characteristics that people have, including intelligence, is genetically passed on. So again, the point is, our ancestors, a person's ancestors, a family's ancestors, don't have to ask our permission to be included in the family affairs. They've already earned it. And that's something to reflect on. Whatever they did by being born, remember, we're going back to life now. They competition, whatever lives they live, their labors, whatever technologies, whatever they transmitted to us, creates that primary debt for us to fulfill the same obligations moving forward for the family. So the same, all of the things that they did that made them who they are, many parts of that, much of that is now passed on to us. And that's an obligation to us. Now, before I go even further into the next slide, let me make an example. If your ancestors ate a healthy diet, you have an obligation to eat a healthy diet, because you wouldn't have the healthy body you have if they didn't eat a healthy diet. If your ancestors followed a beneficial form of mating, you have an obligation. You have an obligation and a debt to follow similar that form of mating and continue it. If your ancestors taught you how to conduct yourself with elders, you have an obligation and a debt to continue the same. If your ancestors followed a productive economic system for the family, if they created a strong family economy and passed it to you through an inheritance, you have a debt and an obligation to follow and carry on those same things. Not just follow and carry on, but to pass it to the next generation. So I want to give some more layers to that ancestral debt. Those are all examples of things, technologies, labors, property, if you will, that are now passed on to us, that we have to take care of and pass on to the next generation. Those are elements of the ancestral debt that you get from life. I want to submit another quote to think about by Edmund Burke. The quote says, "People will not look forward to posterity, the future, your descendants, your heirs. People will not look forward to posterity who never look backward to their ancestors." Very interesting quote, because this is highlighting the tendency of why some people don't have vision. Posterity is vision. You're thinking ahead in the future, because oftentimes people don't even take the time to realize much of what we need has already been provided to us and organized and created by our ancestors. You ever heard the term, you don't have to reinvent the wheel? It's true. It's true. Much of the reason why many times people think that, look, I need to do this and this and this, they never consult the records of their ancestors, whether that's your family history, your elders, your parents, wherever those ancestral records can be found. Oftentimes people don't even realize the same things that you're trying to find or struggle or build, your ancestors already may have done that and done it in an even greater level. So this quote sort of emphasizes or reminds us that we need to make sure we're constantly checking whatever our ancestors did to find things, useful technologies, useful wisdom, useful ways of doing things, solutions, etc., and save ourselves a lot of time, because that is what is going to allow us and help us to look forward. Looking backwards, consulting your ancestors helps you to look forward to plan for the next generation. Part of the ancestral debt is also the fact that people unknowingly, often violate the laws of nature and natural law, and commit tremendous disrespect and create a secondary debt of immense proportions when they intentionally or unintentionally remove their ancestors' influence, quote unquote, vote over family affairs. Now let's summarize that. What are some examples how people can remove their ancestors' influence over the family or vote over the family? You ever heard the saying that's prevalent in modern society? I'm grown, I'm independent, living single, and no one can tell me what to do. That is an example. That is an example of you are eliminating your ancestors out of the equation. If no one can tell you what to do, then your ancestors that may have, create a system or lived a life of modesty for the family, you throw that ancestral technology to the side. Your ancestors that may have had a workable and a very functional system for family leadership, you throw that to the side because you're saying you're grown, you're independent, you're single, and no one can tell you what to do. Another example, how people may violate natural law and nature and disrespect the ancestors and remove the ancestors' influence, is failing to honor and care for your parents and your elders, which is a big one. Another one, squandering the family economy passed to you and your generation. That's another way of removing the ancestors' influence. How? How is that? Because the money or whatever property that is passed to us by our ancestors, it actually doesn't belong to us. It belongs to the dead, the ancestors, the living, and it belongs to the next heirs, the future that are not even born yet, the future children that are not even born yet. So the most that we are is really caretakers of whatever economy or property our ancestors pass us. Our job is to basically take care of things, protect things, family, economy, or property, improve it, do our best to improve it, add to it, and then pass it on to the next generation. So just want to highlight on that squandering the family economy. There's a lot of things that we do unknowingly that just basically blatantly squanders things that took our ancestors, it may have been, 50, 60 years, 100 years to pass on to us, because we oftentimes are indoctrinated in modern society. The individualist ethos is you are the sole controller of your life, and that is false. But nonetheless, some other examples of ways people may remove the ancestral influence or vote or debt: failing to learn and transmitting or teaching and practicing the family culture and history. As I gave examples, let's give an example. What if your family culture has wonderful musical practices or wonderful herbal practices or medicinal practices, and instead of learning and preserving and transmitting that, like many people, sadly, the first thing many people want to do is run to the pharmacy, the modern drug dealer, pharmacy, and just get a pill, 10 pills, instead of consulting your family records about the natural herbs and natural medicines and natural healing modalities. Running to the pill or the modern pills that people often get addicted to. Now, several other examples, and then I'll move on in terms of ways people intentionally or unintentionally remove their ancestors' influence over the family, is abandoning family life cycle systems, such as the ways that your family has generationally married, done birth, such as home birthing, family leadership, as I mentioned before, abandoning the types of family leadership, functional and working and successful. All of these things I'm discussing, functional, working, and successful. Eldership, abandoning the life cycle system of eldership where elders are the leaders or controllers of the family, natural burials, etc., etc. Failing to consult the ancestors' views. That's another example we're submitting of ways that people go away from the ancestral debt. And what does that mean? Let's make it simple. Family records, failing to review or consult family records, written records, last will and testament, or even sacred texts. And failing to protect and improve the family technologies and transmit them to the next generations. So this list that I gave was just examples of how we may be avoiding or violating or creating a secondary debt when we do these things by removing or to remove our ancestors' influence over our affairs, our family affairs, ourselves. I'll submit another quote by a gentleman named Pierre Teilhard de Chardin. It says, humanity is still advancing, and it will probably continue to advance for hundreds of thousands of years more, always on condition, advancement is always on condition, that we know how to keep the same line of advance, the same movement, progress, motivation, as our ancestors towards ever greater consciousness and complexity. Simply put, this quote is saying we have to keep the same momentum, competition. We have to keep the same drive that our ancestors had and even increase it if possible to build, to move forward, to evolve, to get better, etc. And whatever we are able to achieve, we pass it. We put it in a packet. We combine it with whatever was passed to us from our ancestors and pass it to the next generation while we are alive, I might add, so that the same process is continued. Again, I started off this workshop by pointing out the buffaloes. Do the buffaloes change? Do the buffaloes, when the baby buffaloes are born, say, look, I'm independent, I'm an independent buffalo, I don't want to live in a herd, I want to live as an independent buffalo? No, the buffaloes continue the same line of advance and technology as their ancestors. So I think this quote is very relevant to summarize the point of the ancestral debt. We must take a hold of, learn, study, practice what has been passed to us that is useful, beneficial, productive, add our portion to it, and then pass it to the next generation. That's the ancestral debt. Now, just in summary, restoring the intergenerational payment of ancestral debts, that simply means when one generation is born, they have a debt to the previous ones and to the children or the future children that are not even born. So the debt is not just to the previous generation that's lived. No. The intergenerational debt is also to the future children that are not even born. So be aware of this. I will summarize this in probably the most succinct way. If you, dear listener, get $1 million, you achieve that during your lifestyle. Maybe you work and get $1 million, or you invest and make $1 million, or you, I don't know, hit the lottery. That $1 million does not belong to you, as bizarre as that may sound. In ancestral culture, that $1 million belongs to the intergenerational family. Your job with that $1 million is to live as frugal as possible and pass that, whatever you can add to whatever you've accumulated, $1 million or more, pass it to the next generation. And before passing it, teach them how to manage that property. This is not just about money. This is about your physical health, because the same way you can abuse the economy of a family, you can abuse the genetics of the family. So you have to take care of your physical health so that way you're teaching the children of the next generation how to take care of that genetic property of the family. Or when you have children, the children will not be born with any defects because you've abused your health. But nonetheless, I just wanted to point that out. The ancestral debt is both the previous generation and the future generation. Moving along, I want to give some simple examples about implementing or restoring the intergenerational payment of ancestral debt, submitting to your family leadership. In this case, we're presenting male family leadership, which is the norm. Honoring and caring for your parents and family elders, developing the family economy instead of squandering it, saving money, saving resources, and holding it, preserving it for the next generation in perpetuity. Researching, taking time to research, learn, codify, and transmit the family culture and history. Practicing the family life cycle systems. It could be, marriage, arranged marriage, home birth, family leadership, respect for the elders, natural burial, etc. And always consulting the ancestors' views. That's to parents and elders that can tell you about how your ancestors conducted themselves or what they thought about things, the manner that you were raised, sticking to the manner that you were raised, if it was positive, productive, etc. Consulting your family records, the last will and testament, if any are written, or sacred text that was sacred to your family. And also protecting, improving the family technologies and transmitting them to the next generations. All of these things are being presented as ways to pay the ancestral debt, to restore it and to pay it, and to continue paying it. Now, I'll move on to the next part of our presentation in the interest of time. We want to get into natural burial. And natural burial, we're mentioning this as part of the ancestral debt or part of the family technology. So this is going right in line. First, we started with life. Then we now are talking about the ancestral debt. And now we're going into natural burial and why it's important and how to implement it in your family. Natural burial defined. Let's define it first. Natural burial is only burial of bodies that involves no toxic ingredients or materials which poison the body of the deceased or pollute the earth. Natural materials only are used to prepare a deceased person's body. Home funerals is a part of natural burial. Home funerals, which simply means having funerals at home, which was the norm, I might add, before the modern funeral home industry, and also burials on family-owned land. Natural burial also includes when family members are all buried in a family cemetery on family-owned land. That's also an aspect of natural burial. Funerals and burials which honor and do not desecrate the body or the memory of the deceased. Those are all aspects. This is another aspect of natural burial. And no bankrupting of the family economy. So for burial to be even called natural, the family economy cannot go bankrupt to facilitate the type of burial that we see many times in modern society, 20,000, 30, I don't know what it is nowadays, but nonetheless, excessive amounts being charged or people being forced to pay just to bury one of their loved ones. That would be unnatural burial. Now, for those that are seeing the screen, I'm giving examples of home funerals. You see examples of people inside of a home holding an actual funeral in their family home, which is again part of the ancestral debt, which is how funerals typically were held before modern funeral homes. I'm also giving an example for those that can see the PowerPoint of a green burial. People in the most simplest way in a wooded area or on a field, their family members that they're burying are in a plain wooden casket in one image, and in the other image, wrapped. The family member is being lowered into the grave in a simple shroud. Now, going to the point of how can people institute or what is a family burial system? A workable, a functional family burial system. When you control the family economy of the funeral, the burial, and the aftercare. So certain ways to do that are to always maintain a family burial fund. Also, we are suggesting always maintain, especially on the providers of the family, the main breadwinners, quote unquote, $10,000 insurance policies, minimum. That's just minimum. Also having an aftercare system for widows and orphan children. This is all within the family. We're presenting this as a part of a family burial system. Also, ensuring that the family has natural burial education, whether that's through workshops, classes, and training, because the sad part, on top of the other sad parts of how much people have lost, especially when it comes to things like home birthing, midwifery, when you look at the natural burial space, most of that information has been completely lost for the majority of the population, especially in so-called Western or modern countries. Most people would have a heart attack if you told them you need to prepare the body of your deceased relative, because that information has been lost. So now the way to implement that information back into the family is finding out institutions or organizations that can provide that, so everybody, the young people, the old people, the adults, etc., the men, women, and the children, everybody's aware that burial is a natural process and there's a way you do it. So nobody is afraid of death. And also accessing and connecting with burial societies that can provide that sort of support or resources or services. These are all being presented as necessary parts of establishing and maintaining a family burial system. Again, for those that can see the workshop, the workshop, we have right now a slide up that shows there are people doing this as we speak, maintaining home funeral and green burial training workshops, educational classes, courses, and that's what we're seeing on the screen right now. Actual workshops being conducted with people practicing how to move a body using a sheet, and how to do prepare a body inside your family home, et cetera, et cetera. So these things do exist, and we, the Ancestral Burial Society, provide these things also for anybody that is interested. Now, in closing, I want to mention a few things so we can distinguish natural burial, green burial, ancestral burial, which is part of the family system. That's part of the ancestral debt. We want to distinguish the natural burial from the toxic burial. Elements of the toxic and immoral funeral industry or burial practices or funeral practices are the following. They use toxic ingredients such as formaldehyde. They drain the blood out of the deceased person's body and they inject formaldehyde in the person's body. Formaldehyde has already been scientifically proven to be a cancer-causing agent. It pollutes the person's body and it pollutes the earth once you put their body inside of the earth. Also, there's a lot of unnecessary procedures being done in the modern funeral industry to the bodies of deceased persons that have nothing to do with burial. There's no need to drain their blood. What is that for? There's no need for sewing up their jaw, which is a common practice in the modern funeral industry. Sewing up their jaw, yes, to close their mouth, and gluing their lips shut, and gluing the person's eyelids shut. That's unnecessary. It's actually abuse. It's corpse abuse, ancestor abuse, and whatever else. So these are examples and others of why the funeral industry, the modern funeral industry, is actually a violation, a violation of the deceased. Also, the high cost of funerals and burials is ridiculous. The cost ranges in different places, of course, but some of the prices that they give people or families, grieving families, I might add, for coffins, it's an insult. Why do you need to spend $10,000 for a coffin? Why do you need to spend $4,000 for flower arrangements? Another example, or two more examples, final examples, are it's unnatural for family members to be buried in different cemeteries. That is completely against the natural ancestral burial system or green burial system. Traditional cultures, all family members are buried in the same plot, typically in their own land. So this whole foreign idea, this artificial idea of the grandmother's buried over there in one cemetery, the mother's buried in another cemetery, the father's buried in another cemetery, the children are buried in another cemetery. If you really think about it, it's insane. It's ridiculous. So this is another reason why the modern funeral and burial industry is it's just immoral. It doesn't make sense. If you want to see all your family members, they should be buried in the same cemetery. And also that's a form, we're arguing that's a form of homelessness. When you allow your family member to be buried in a cemetery that your family does not own, in traditional culture, that's looked at as you're consigning them to homelessness because their body is residing somewhere else, some other property, some other land that's controlled by somebody else and not your family. So we're presenting that as a form of homelessness. Again, I talked about the environmental pollution, and I could go on, but in the interest of time, I won't. I'll just mention again, formaldehyde and all of the toxic chemicals that they pump in people's bodies unnecessarily, deceased persons' bodies, they're carcinogenic to humans, animals, and the environment. And it's a form of taxidermy. The same way people taxidermize animals that they hunt, cut off the head or maybe the whole animal and stick it on a wall and use all sorts of preservative fluids and disinfectants and whatever else to display that body. We're arguing that that is what is being done to people's bodies when they go to the funeral home. And it's a desecration of your ancestors, your AKA your deceased relatives. For those that can see on the screen, we have a slide with some examples of taxidermy. And we have a slide of Frankenstein's monster and also a coffin, just to highlight or to emphasize how disrespectful it is to put your loved one in a modern funeral home and allow them to cut, slash, drain the blood out, and pump embalming fluid in your loved one. That's one of the greatest ways of desecrating your loved one. Return back to the natural system, which doesn't do any of that, and you learn how to prepare your loved one at home, their body at home. Also, we might again mention the toxicity of the modern funeral industry and the immorality of it, again, is grounded in the fact that you are transferring ownership and guardianship of your deceased family members to strangers. You're basically paying strangers because you pay the cemetery to take possession of your loved ones. So we are pointing out, highlighting that is toxic. Your loved ones, anyone's loved ones, any family's family members should be buried on family-owned land. Additionally, we're emphasizing again, that's a form of homelessness. That's basically giving your deceased relatives, you're putting them out the family because wherever they are currently, quote unquote, residing in a cemetery, it's not family property. Now, in summary, and we'll take a few questions if that anyone may have, the Ancestral Burial Society, we provide a range of services from home funerals, green burials, natural body preparation, natural cemeteries, natural funerals in the family home, green burials on family-owned land in the family cemetery. We have a range of educational courses, programs, classes that train people on what natural burial is or ancestral burial and family. So there's a range of that. We also provide lectures, sponsored lectures and consultations to those that are interested. And also family burial planning. And we also teach people that are interested or organizations how to create burial funds that will always have the money on hand to bury your loved ones. Nonetheless, for those that are looking at the slide online, you can contact us in various ways. If you want to contact us through Facebook, Ancestral Burial. Type in Ancestral Burial on Facebook. We also have a YouTube channel, Ancestral Burial Society. You can contact us there. And if you wish to email us, you can email us at ancestralburialsociety@gmail.com or greenburialsociety@gmail.com. And
All right.
thank you for your time.
Excellent presentation. We have many questions and comments. So what we'll do is we'll go from the top down, and then I will open up for any questions for Director Z. We have a comment in here in regards to cremation. Is cremation a respectful practice? Director Z,
Thank
do
you.
have a for that?
Yes. The word respectful, we want to contextualize. This whole presentation is about ancestral debt. So when we use the term respect, we have to frame it within whatever family or culture. In India, many of the people in India, due to religion or culture, they utilize cremation. So cremation is respectful because that is their ancestral practice. So that's how we're reframing that word cremation and reframing it to, is that what your ancestors did? So that's how we're reframing that. Now, to answer the question of cremation in the entirety, which I think, hopefully, I believe anyway, the questioner was asking, the modern system of cremation is not a respectful practice. The modern system of cremation is not the ancestral system that is found in certain places like India and in certain parts of Asia and other places of the world. In those societies, the traditional practice of cremation is passed on by their ancestors, and the family members of the deceased are the ones that cremate the body. They don't outsource it. So the traditional ancestral practice of cremation in those societies that cremation is native, key word, native, the family cremates the body. That's how it's respectfully, quote unquote, done. Now let's look at the modern society of cremation. It's nothing but outsourcing. People hand over the bodies of their loved ones to strangers in the funeral home or the crematory. And we must emphasize, there's no way for you to know if that's your loved one's ashes they're handing you back. It's not respectful. You cannot verify that that's your loved one's ashes. So under the context of the modern system of cremation, cremation under the modern system is not respectful. It's disrespectful because you can't verify that's your loved one's ashes that they're handing you back. Secondly, and I'll pause on this question, and because I know we have other questions, the modern system of cremation is not respectful because the ashes of people's loved ones are mixed with the ashes or the dust of previous people or possibly pets that have been cremated. They cannot remove every single atom, molecule, or dust out of the device that they use to cremate bodies. They cannot remove every atom, molecule, or dust. So it is absolutely the case that when different people are being cremated, I mean, dust is being mixed in, cremated dust of one person with another. So for that reason, absolutely, it's not respectful.
Okay.
The modern system.
Okay, thank you for that. We have another question. Is organ donation okay? What if it's for a family member?
Organ donation, again, couching this within context. Organ donation is saving a life. So if organ donation is done for a family member, 100%, in most traditional cultures, they absolutely would agree with that, because it's saving a life, and that's one of the highest virtues that a person could perform. So yes. Now we have to put this in context here, because there's limits on this. There's limits have to be drawn on organ donation. The modern organ donation industry, there's a lot of corruption in it. People that have more money are getting organs, and those that have less money are getting less money. Excuse me, are not eligible to receive organs. So money also plays a great role in that. Also, let's ask this one question. We have to ask the question: is that organ compatible with you? We're not talking about if that kidney can, work as a kidney. That kidney is coming from a different set of genetics. We have to consider what's the effect of donated genetics in kidneys and organs. What effect is it having on you? So we have to also consider that. It cannot be just a simple matter. Yes, in general, yes, it's one of the highest virtues to save a life with an organ, yes. But we also have to ask and place limits and say, hold up, should you donate organs even if there's some possible negative effect on your genetics if you receive organs that have genetic traits, genetic diseases, genetic, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm just in traditional cultures, but there's also limitations on it.
Okay. I have another question. Is certification needed for someone to do their own family burial? What if you don't own land to bury your dead? What are your options if you want a green burial? Do you need a permit to bury? How does someone bypass authorities if someone passes from COVID-19? They look like 4 questions, so let's just deal with maybe 2. Is certification needed for someone to do their own family burial? And the second is, what if you don't own land to bury your dead? What are your options if you want a green burial?
Okay, wonderful. Let's decontextualize the word certification. Yes, certification is needed. What is certification? Certification is demonstrated competence. So yes, demonstrated competence is needed to do green burial, just like demonstrated competence is needed to cook food. Yes. So when we talk about certification, we're not just talking about possibly you went to a quote unquote mainstream school. No, there are many natural burial organizations like our organization, the Ancestral Burial Society. We provide certification. We have training programs to train and certify people. But I want to mention that certification does not just mean you didn't go to a mainstream school. No, certification in the entirety means you are competent. And of course, you need to be competent. Certification is needed. Certification in the sense you have been educated and trained and verified to be competent. Yes. And if people are interested in the certification or the education, training, and certification that we offer, the Ancestral Burial Society, it is available. Now, the second question, could you please, I think I remember, what if you do not have land to do natural burial? What are your options? Great question. The first option would be, we would suggest, save your money and buy land. We suggest when you're talking about creating a family cemetery, you only need 5 acres. Actually, 5 acres is that's a good amount of land. So we would suggest, this is what we suggest in our workshops, take your income tax check. Get 2 or 3 family members, whoever they are, or maybe they're not family members, maybe 2 or 3 families that are serious, and commit and say, you know what? We're going to take our income tax check. So we're going to save money over the course of the year, and then we're going to take that money and purchase several acres and use that for the cemetery for our family from now on. When you purchase that sort of land, you want to make sure you purchase land that is zoned, that is in an area that is zoned for that. When you have land, typically you purchase in an agriculture area or a rural area, it's almost all the times zoned, or you can use it for a cemetery. So make sure of the type or the area of the land that you're purchasing. So those would be my suggestions of that as the first option. Save money, 6 months to a year deadline, no more than a year. And then whatever money is saved, just get several acres. Right there now you have a family cemetery. Option number one. Option number two would be buried in a natural burial cemetery. They have them. They do exist. They do exist. What you could do is buy a certain section. You may tell the natural burial cemetery, look, we want a plan in perpetuity for burying our family, but we don't have family land. So we would like to buy a certain section of your cemetery in a natural cemetery or a green cemetery. And they do it all the time. Even conventional cemeteries do it. Certain religious groups also do it. They'll buy a whole section of a cemetery and all of their people or their group or their family are buried in that section. So that I'm suggesting as is option number two, you could make use of pre-existing cemeteries. We suggest only natural or green cemeteries and just buy a certain section of the land that will accommodate however many family members that you wish to be buried there.
Okay, we're running out of time, but I'm going to give one more question, and then we will close out and show the contact information for Director Z and the Ancestral Burial Society. The last question is, what kind of authority do you need in order to do a home or green burial or home funeral? What type of authority do you need in order for you to successfully do that?
In order to do a home funeral or a home burial, I'll start with home funeral. Every single state, listen very closely, every single state in the United States has laws that allow home funerals and home burials. Every single state. And when I say they have laws, either they have laws explicitly saying you can do it, or the law doesn't say you can do it, which basically means you can do it. Every single state. Now, in order to do a home funeral, prepare the bodies of your loved one at home, you just have to be, again, competent. And competent doesn't mean somebody that has the desire but not the knowledge. No, competent means you have to know how to handle bodies. You have to know how to deal with the safety protocol to prevent disease transmission. You have to know how to lift bodies without injuring yourself. You have to know how to preserve bodies for however long they're going to be in the family home so that decay doesn't set in. The list goes on. You get the point. So going back to the whoever the person was that asked the question about competence, the law allows you to prepare your loved ones at home under certain conditions. It does. It already does. So there's not some paperwork you have to go get from mainstream system. You just have to know how to do it. And there's a lot that goes into doing it. That's the home funerals. Now the home burials, that's another thing. Similar, you have to have land. You have to have land that is in an area, whether it's your land you reside on or maybe just land you use for other purposes, agriculture or whatever. You have to have land that is in an area that permits that. So in other words, if you have land in a farming area or agriculture area, it's almost certainly always the case. Do not even attempt, if you're living in the middle of New York City, to do a home burial. No, you already know the answer to that. Chicago, Detroit, don't do it. Don't. We'll save you the time. So in order to do a home burial, you just simply need land that's in an area that permits that, and most rural or agricultural areas permit that. And if you have land that you live on, you could also do it, as long as your land that you live on is in an area that doesn't prohibit it. Excellent. But also you need the information and the knowledge of how to bury a body, because there's an actual system of how to safely bury a body. How deep the hole should be dug, how to safely put the body in the hole or the grave, so to speak, and certain elevations or certain, the topography of the land. Some land you don't want to bury bodies, because if it's prone to seasonal flooding, you might have some problems burying a body in certain locations and on that type of land. But nonetheless, the knowledge and the information and also the location are key to home funerals and home burials.
Excellent. Director Z, would you mind unsharing your screen so that I can share on my end?
Yes, sir. Can you see that?
Well, stop your share. I think it's when you close out your screen, you should see a little red button that says stop sharing. Just want to share my.
Got you.
Okay.
Is that good?
Yep, that's good. Okay. So for anyone that's interested, this is a very informative, as you can tell, presentation, and it requires more details and more training and more questions answered. So if you have those type of questions, you could reach out to Director Z of the Ancestral Burial Society or by email, ancestralburialsociety@gmail.com, phone number 404-548-8608. But it's something that I believe is very necessary. So as we deal with the close of this last day of the 30-day redemption, it seems applicable now that as people transition or carry the spirit of this information forward, that you can see into the future how best to deal with your ancestors, how best to deal with yourself. And so I'm going to open up any closing comments for Director Z that he wants to leave with the audience before we end the end of the 30-day redemption, which again, we may re-up again in June. So stay tuned for that and some workshops in May. So any closing comments, Director Z?
Yes, thank you, Kashab. I'd like to extend my thanks and appreciation to you for the opportunity to share this vital information with the audience. Like to thank everyone that joined in and listened in. And I would say this, the theme of this 30-day is redemption. Redemption means freedom. And if we want to contextualize ancestral burial and freedom, if you don't have your own family cemetery, you are a slave to burying your loved ones in somebody else's cemetery. That's a form of financial slavery. If you don't know how to prepare the bodies of your loved one, you are in a form of burial preparation slavery. And if you, every time somebody in your family dies, you have to shell out five, $10,000, $15,000 to somebody else to prepare the bodies of your loved one, you are in financial and economic slavery. So my final thoughts would be to the audience, redeeming yourself from financial slavery, economic slavery, burial slavery, debt slavery, cemetery slavery, funeral home slavery. Learn how to bury your loved ones. Contact us if you wish to learn about how to do all things within that entire process: home funerals, home burials, family burial fund, the whole 9 yards, and you will redeem your family, and then you can pass that redemption on to your children in the next generation.
Excellent. Thank you again, Director Z. For everyone else that was a participant from day one or at any part of the 30-day redemption, we hope that this segment, this April segment of redemption, has been of value to you. We invite you to share the Facebook fan page with your friends and family so that they can be kind of queued up on the 30 days. And that information is available on the screen, 30-day redemption on Facebook. Type it into the search and share that with your friends and family. And we will invite you to continue to share the 30-day redemption because it will be an ongoing process, both the 1 hour free segments and then the workshops that we'll be doing in May and ongoing. So thank you all. Have a fantastic day. It was a great journey with you. And thank you again, Director Z. Thank you, Rafaela, for all the hard work behind the scenes and in front of the scenes. And I appreciate you all, and we will talk soon.